Our scripture this morning comes from the book of Nehemiah in the Old Testament. We'll be reading verses 1 through 4 in chapter 1. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, in the month of Chislev, in the 20th year, while I was in Susa, the capital, one of my brothers, Hananiah, came to me with certain men from Judah. And I asked him about the Jews that survived, those who had escaped the captivity, and about Jerusalem. They replied, the survivors there are in the province who escaped captivity are in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates have been destroyed by fire. When I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days, fasting and praying before the God of heaven. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. I was watching the words up on the screen for the last song that was just played, The Power of Your Name, and I'm sitting here thinking that's my sermon. So if you remember those words, you know where I'm going here this morning. If you meet somebody new for the first time, and you're just having that chit-chat, that conversation, trying to get to know one another, you're pretty soon you're going to ask them, well, what do you do? Because our jobs are pretty much really define who we are in many ways. Maybe that's not right, but that's true. And every now and then when you're talking to somebody and you're getting to know them, they'll say, well, you know, I this is what pays the bills, but what gets me excited, my passion is, and then they'll go on to tell you. Passion is that which gives you that intense desire to do good, that enthusiasm that compels you to help someone or help something. And it's the word passion it talks about something that motivates folks and is almost uncontrollable. We like to think of passion as being something good, and it is. But the very root of that word, the very Latin root of the word passion, means to suffer. I want us to think this morning about what it means to be passionate about something, anything, as a disciple of Jesus Christ. What does it mean to be intensely enthused and just have this unrelenting desire to help someone or help something, correct something, and yet know that brings with it at times unpleasantness. We can't find, really, our passion without dealing with the corresponding pain. And asking people to deal with heartbreak and pain is not an easy way to start any conversation, much less a sermon. But discovering our passion links us to that which has hurt us, that which we look out to others and see other people hurting. Situations that can be frightening indeed are the source of that passion, but also the source of caring and hope. I hope you'll stick with me and hope I can make some sense of that. Our lives are really not as full and grace-filled as they can be until we identify that passion within us, and we can't do that until we identify that heartbreak that we carry with us. I want us to take a look at those verses that we read in Nehemiah this morning. Nehemiah is a wonderful book. It addresses so much of what's going on today, and frankly, not that many people know about it. If you're one of those, I encourage you to start reading a chapter or two a day and getting a feel. Nehemiah is the name of the character, the primary person that this book is about, other than God. And the verses we read this morning they don't give us the entire picture, but they begin to tell us how Nehemiah, dealt with his heartbreak. Nehemiah means the Lord has comforted. But when you read that, not just the verses we read, but when you read that entire first chapter, maybe even in the second chapter, you're going to notice two things right off the bat. One is that Nehemiah himself is not being comforted by the Lord very much. And you're also going to notice that Nehemiah himself is not comforting others. Not at the very beginning. We see someone that the Lord is using, that will use to comfort others, but not at the very beginning. What we see here at the very beginning is a person who is a very high-level leader in the community, noble in character, but we also got to understand that Nehemiah is a slave. He is a slave in Babylonian captivity. His family, a generation or so earlier, had been taken captive by the Babylonians and been taken to another country. They're not in their homeland. They're not in Jerusalem. They're not anywhere near all the things of the temple and all the things that made them who they were. His job is to take care of the king, Xerxes. And his job, Nehemiah's job, is to make sure that Xerxes is in complete and total comfort, befitting his rank. Nehemiah is a cup holder, and that doesn't sound like much to us today, but it means this. It means that he is a trusted assistant to the king. It means that he's a person of immense influence, because when you spend 7 days a week, hours upon hours a day with the king, and the king trusts you, you become that person that could, if you wanted to, and have some influence on the king. He's a trusted assistant, because you see, if you wanted to get rid of the king, if you had a grievance and you wanted to be a king, or you wanted your person to be the king, the easiest way to do that would be to poison the king's drink. So the cupbearer is the one who oversees that process. And if absolutely necessary, the cupbearer would pour a glass of wine and drink it himself before he served that wine to the king. And they would wait 5 or 10 minutes to see if anything happened to him. Nehemiah is in this uncomfortable position of being in bondage, but he has at the same time, to a degree, become comfortable in his slavery. He's living a pretty good life. But here's the catch. And here's the catch that you and I need to hear and think about ourselves. He's okay, doing okay himself, but he's not doing what he's been called to do. He's not doing what he's been born to do, and he's not doing what he's been named to do, being a comfort to someone else. And yet he himself has a level of comfortableness. He's comfortable. It's not the best. I can't go and do everything I want the way I want to, but it's okay. And what's true of Nehemiah is also, as an individual, is also true of his nation. The nation of Israel is not living out God's intentions. The nation of Israel is not living out what it's learned and had learned in worship and in the schools and their teaching. But they had become adjusted to life. The ones in Babylon had adjusted to being in exile. The people back in Jerusalem, as struggling as they were, they had made accommodations. They had grown accustomed. They had made whatever adjustments needed to be made in order to survive. Maybe that can be said of you and me. This life we're living isn't quite exactly what we had hoped it would be at our particular age and place and station, but we've learned to adjust, and we've learned how to compromise and make things do, and we're like Nehemiah, we're at times quite comfortable. But one day, all this changed. Just as it will change one day, if it hasn't already, for you and me. You see, comfort isn't about material things. How much money you have, your house, your cars, your vacation, your toys. Joseph Daniels, in his book Walking with Nehemiah, says that comfort is being satisfied with the status quo. Comfort is being satisfied with that way that things are. Maybe we know that they're not the best, but what can I do about it? And I'm okay. And he goes on to say, it's when we're satisfied with the status quo, even when we know that God is calling us to change this world. Or maybe even just God is calling just to change this part of our world. If you're comfortable where you are, even when you know that things should be different, if you've been called and named to comfort those who are afflicted and you're ignoring that call, understand this: God is going to come knocking someday. And when your inconsistency will be brought to your attention. God is going to remind you that you weren't called merely as a disciple of Jesus Christ to only be comfortable in this lifetime. God has called you into ministry. There's all sorts of definitions of what ministry is and isn't. One I've liked the best is this, and it applies to you as well as it applies to me. That God has called you and me to a ministry that involves being a comfort to those who are afflicted and afflicting those who are comfortable. And if you're going to do God's will, great things are going to happen. Broken lives and broken communities are going to be restored. You will find not only that it's possible, but you will let go of that comfort level. And you will find a way individually and collectively to be involved in the healing of hurting souls. Sometimes things are happening right in front of us and we don't realize it. Sometimes things are happening right in front of us that are hidden. For Nehemiah, all this turned around when his brother and some other folks showed up. They had been to Jerusalem and they were coming back to Susa, and they came to see Nehemiah. Now, they came to see Nehemiah for two reasons. One is Hananiah and Nehemiah were brothers. So, brother comes back from an extended trip, you're going to go visit with him. But they also came to visit with Nehemiah because, remember, he's a person of influence. He's with the king every single day for hours upon hours every single day. He's trusted. The king will listen if Nehemiah will just approach him. So they come, and before they can even say anything at all, our verses this morning tell us that Nehemiah says, "Tell me what's going on in Jerusalem." And what he's told and what's brought to his attention is that things are beyond horrible. They're beyond terrible. Whatever the words don't describe the depth of the pain and the brokenness and the bondage. Those who are still living in Jerusalem, those who had never been taken away and out of the country into exile, are living a life that is filled with trouble and distress. The walls around the city are torn down, the gates are burned, and what that means is that they're vulnerable to everybody. All the nomadic groups that are going around, all the armies that are marching to and from, looking for try to pick a fight, they're there. All the systems that should be bringing comfort and hope to them are not. And if you listen closely to the text and just let your imagination go just a little bit, you can almost hear Nehemiah's heart crumble. You can almost see that just look of devastation on his face. His heart is broken. And when your heart's broken, it changes. It changes you, the way you live your life, the way you exist, the way you move. A broken heart changes not just your appearance, but your attitude as well. It says in our text this morning, which is just a short little glimpse of a much longer story. We're told that when Nehemiah was told about things that were going on back in his homeland and people, and some of whom are, of course, his relatives, that his heart's broken and that he sat down and he cried, not just for a little while, but he cried for days and days and days and days and days. His people were vulnerable and defenseless, and that's no small thing. That's no small thing when that happens to you. Because when you're vulnerable and when you're defenseless, those around you who have evil intentions start acting. And pretty soon things that are unjust and things that are unfair are happening all the time, and you're suffering, and sometimes you don't even understand why you're suffering, or you don't even know where to go or what to do and how to address it. You no longer have the ability to choose whom you let in and whom you keep out of your life when you're vulnerable and hopeless. In other words, just the simple act of control is gone. You can't decide who's going to come and be. You just have no control. When Nehemiah hears this, his heart breaks. And he sits down, as I said, and weeps for days at a time. And understand this, Nehemiah is not a crybaby. And he's not a chump. He's not what today we'd call a snowflake. He's strong and he's courageous and he's bold and he takes risk. And yet he cried and wept for days. Has anything happened in your life that's affected you for more than a week or so? I mean, profoundly affected you. Has anything happened that your soul just mourns and grieves for days on end? And I can tell you that being on staff here now for as long as I've had, and being honored and privileged to be a part of your journeys as well, I can say that without naming names, I can say, or situations, I can say yes. Many of you have. And many of you, probably the rest of you have, and I just haven't, I don't know about it yet. It isn't until you know for whom or for what your heart breaks that God can reveal where in the community and with whom in our community your ministry needs to be done. This brokenheartedness isn't about stuff about love songs. It's about what lifelong mission is about. Hopefully I can tell this quickly. I want to tell you two stories. Two stories about two people in the same church that I pastored. I had the honor of pastoring. One day out of the blue, a woman named Karen came up and talked to me. She said, I want to talk to you. Okay, fine. She said, and I will never forget this. She said to me, because first of all, Karen was she was involved with the church, but when I thought of maybe some of the leadership in the church, her name didn't really crop up. But that was about to change. Because she said to me, she said, David, I cannot stand it to know that people in our county, there are people in our county who go to bed hungry every night because they do not have any food. I didn't think that was such a big problem. I found out later. I began to have my eyes open and realize that is a problem. Well, what are we going to do about it? I don't have time to tell you all the things, but we started off doing this, that didn't work. We tried this, that didn't work. Some of the people in our church were not happy about what we were doing. There was a widespread belief in our congregation that, you're just not working hard enough. You're not taking care of yourself. We're not here to help lazy people. You know the drill. You've heard it. You may have said it even. But that began to change. And it began to change early on when one day that a fellow was helping, we had some folks that were helping carry boxes of food out to the vehicles for people who needed that help. And one fellow in particular was really vocal about that. We shouldn't be doing this. We're just encouraging laziness. We're just encouraging things that shouldn't be, just adamant. He believed that. He was carrying a box of food out for an elderly gentleman. And then when they got out to the truck and he put the box on the bed of the truck, the elderly man turned to him and he said, and told him how thankful he was for this food. And then he said, I haven't had anything to eat for 2 weeks except turnips. As far as I know, that ministry that began about 15 years ago is still there. And a congregation of about roughly 200 people feeds 300 families twice a month. The second story, same church, different person. Faye was our mission chairperson. She arranged for us to go to Lake Charles, Louisiana. This is August 2007. We went to Lake Charles because a couple years earlier, Hurricane Rita and a second hurricane that I can't remember the name of that one. There were two hurricanes that went through about a week or so apart. One hit New Orleans just terrible. The second one, Rita, which is the forgotten, which ironically is the one I remember, affected some areas, New Orleans, but also Lake Charles. And Lake Charles is 40 miles from the coast. So we went down and we got assigned a house. And there was a 30-year-old that was there in the group, and there was me. He was the youngest, and then I was the second youngest. There was other people there. So I'm saying we're not a young group, okay? So we decided it's too hot, humid, blah, blah, blah. We're not getting up and fixing a roof. We were randomly assigned a house, and guess what we needed to do? So we're up on the roof, except for the guy that fell through the roof. It was rotten on top of destroyed by a hurricane. Since the women that went with us weren't going to climb up there and join us on the roof, they went to the FEMA trailer park. And they met Carol, the woman whose house we had been randomly assigned to. And when we met with our group, when we got her set around after our meal in the evening, we found out that actually being in a FEMA trailer for 2+ years was the least of this woman's troubles. So in the course of that, after we had kind of met as a group, Faye and I were visiting, and we had already made up our mind that we were going to come down and try to make an impact in that community, Lake Charles. So we had already decided that we were going to come down every 2 or 3 months for about a year or so and do what we could do and go on. So we decided, Faye and I were discussing it, and Faye said, well, what if instead of coming down and just doing this and this and this and this, why don't we come down and make a commitment to get Carol back into her house? Because she said, you know what, Carol's lost hope. Carol doesn't believe that after 2 years and absolutely nothing going with her house that she was ever going to leave that trailer. And that trailer would fit right in there. And it was Carol, her 2 adult daughters, her grandson, and we didn't know it at the time, but she had another grandchild coming. She's lost hope. And that bothered Faye. It bothered her immensely. We didn't do it by ourselves, but we did get her back in that following summer. We had help from other people, and God started opening doors. God just made that effort a joy instead of a burden. At one point, we needed somebody to go with us with some expertise in plumbing. And as talented as our group was, we had no plumbers in the group. Out of the blue, a colleague of mine, a fellow pastor from about 30, 40 miles away, called me and said, hey, we heard what you're doing. Can we come when you go the next time? Can we come? I said, great. We need 4 more people. That's great. I said, hey, I don't know. We really need a plumber, somebody with knowledge there, because we got to get that fixed next before we can go on. There was a pause for a little while, and he says, well, before I became a minister, I was a plumber. I said, you're my man, buddy. And he came down and took care of things. We had people not related to our congregation at all. I owned a tile shop. You need tile? Yes. He gave us some. A cabinet maker said, I can't give it to you at cost, but I can't give it to you for free, but I can give it to you for cost if you'll give me the measurements. We'll measure the next time we go down. And that went on and on and on. But here's the thing. At the end of both of those, when we started that food ministry and when we completed and we got Carol and her family back into their home, their real home, we had grown. We had grown in our faith. We had grown in our outreach. We had grown in our love for one another. We had grown in so many ways. And that all started because 2 people had their hearts broken by the fact that there was pain and injustice and inequality around them. So the question is, what breaks your heart? And for whom does your heart break? The way to find your passion as a disciple of Jesus Christ is to know what breaks your heart and who breaks your heart. And if you have trouble understanding that, look at the example of Christ. Christ had just received word that his cousin, John the Baptist, had been murdered, and he wanted time alone. He needed to grieve and mourn and process all that. What's he end up doing? He ends up being with 5,000 plus people, and he teaching and feeding them and healing them. Why? Because he had compassion and his heart broke for them. Mark, the 3rd chapter, tells us a story where Jesus heals this man's withered hand, is the way it's described. But here's the deal. He heals that hand because he has compassion on that person. But it's the Sabbath day, and he's in the synagogue when that happens. Now, he knows full well, better than you and I know, that was going to cause trouble. Breaking the Sabbath and in the synagogue. And it says in verse 6, the Pharisees went out and immediately conspired with the Herodians against Jesus, how to destroy him. If you know what breaks your heart, you will soon find out what you need, where you need to be in ministry, and where that ministry needs to take place. In your life will find meaning and purpose and passion. And you will be a help and a source of hope to folks who have no hope and just don't know where they're going and feeling like they're being picked on all the time by everybody. Nehemiah's ministry, his most effective ministry, was birthed out of deep, deep pain. His people were suffering. His neighbors were struggling, even though his neighbors were several hundred miles away. And at first, he didn't see how he could do anything with it. Understand this. I am not suggesting this as a prelude to suggest some new ministry for our congregation. There are many places for you to connect if you haven't already, but maybe, just maybe, you can identify that place in your heart that you just can't give it up, and it's there with you a day, at night, and all the time, and you're just, what do I do? You turn that over to God, and God will let you know. But here's the deal. Like Nehemiah, you can be a comfort to someone else, but you're going to have to give up that which is comfortable. And you're going to have to engage a troubled and shamed people. Maybe just across the fence over here, maybe around the world. I don't know. But you can and will and find great joy and meaning in your life when you find the passion that fueled our Savior's life as well. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.